Hello and welcome to the Oddschecker Betting Podcast. We've had Royal Ascot, we've had Glorious Goodwood, and we now move on to one of the biggest flat meetings of the summer. It is the 4-day Welcome to Yorkshire Ebor Festival. Of course, it's held on the Knaves Mile. We've got some of the biggest races of the week, include the Juddmonte International, the Yorkshire Oaks, the Nunthorpe Stakes, and of course the £500,000 Sky Bet Ebor on Saturday afternoon. And I'm going to be joined for all 4 days to preview the action with Andy Holden, Oddschecker's resident tipster. You can read Andy's tips on the Oddschecker app every day, and also Rory Delargy. First off, Andy, obviously you had a good weekend. Great Ambassador, your nap struck on Saturday. How have you kind of found the racing at the minute? Are you leading into York? Do you feel the ground starting to dry up a little bit as well? It kind of the results are sticking to what we'd usually think in terms of we're not having soft ground mudlarks winning every week now.
Well, having done it every day for like the last 3 or 4 months without much of a pause. There has been some still funny results out there, Dan. I mean, there's been 125 to 1 shots, 80 to 1 shots here, there, and everywhere. But I just think that's indicative of fairly low grade stuff. And what I've tended to find, Rory has been the same way. But you get these build-ups to these big meetings, and it goes really quiet for a week or two. And we sort of the better horses go into hiding, and obviously connections are waiting for the bigger and better prizes. So it can be a tough grind day in, day out. You're just basically trying to keep your head above water and cherry pick and just almost go through there with trying to stop the bleeding, as it were, until the better meeting comes along and you can crack on and really get stuck in. But I always find this meeting is probably the hardest one of the whole lot, because you often find that a lot of the horses that come here with big numbers, big reputations, big performances behind them can tread on a few banana skins just because they're stepping on foot on York. York is a very funny surface. Luckily, it's going to be a clean surface this week because the rain is due to keep away for the thick end of the week. So we should get nice ground, but I'll be treading very, very carefully with horses that haven't run at York before.
Rory, obviously you had a greght weekend. You tipped up Just Another Bottle, the Great Sim Wilfred winner. What about yourself going into the meeting and just your thoughts ahead of York?
I'm feeling a little bit more positive and confident now than I have been for a while. It's been slightly ironic that we did Royal Ascot, and my best bet there was pulled out at the last minute and then won next time out. And that's Goodwood, my 2 best bets of the week. Both one of them wouldn't line up, and then the other one was scuppered by the rain at the weekend and finished nearly last. And both of those, Just on the Bottle was the second of those, won the Great St. Wilfrid. So I've been waiting for him for about 2 years for the Stewards Cup, and then the rain absolutely ruined his chance. But he showed what he could do at Ripon. So it's been a slightly annoying in that I was much more heavily involved in the pair of them, him and Just Hubert, than I was when they won. But still positive results, and it makes you think that at least you're doing something right.
And looking ahead to York, chaps, obviously just in terms of as a track, would you say it's quite fair in general?
Yeah, it's a fair track. I tend to look for horses that they're going to be held up off the pace on the round track in particular. I mean, Rory will probably go into the more dynamics about the draw. Depending on what distance, I think it matters less. The further back they go, the more chance you've got of getting in and getting a clearer run in the home straight. I think the 1.5 miles beyond that, the Ebor, for instance, high numbers tend to not dominate, but they seem to do okay in comparison to how you'd think. And on the straight track, usually down the tip of the arrow, really, something down the centre. You don't want to be drawn on either side of the flank. If you've got 22 runners stretched across the track and you fancy one, it's drawn 1 or it's drawn 22, you're probably unlikely to draw. So not necessarily so much horses held up on the straight track, but on the round track. If you're on a front runner there, you're usually in real trouble. It's a bit like Doncaster. The front runners often get eaten alive.
But a lot of people still refer to York as a front runner's track. Interestingly,
It isn't on the. I mean, it can be done. It's not like beyond the realms of impossibility, but I would say there's a good data nowadays to suggest that you want to be mid-division towards the back of the field, turning for home.
And again, I think that's why you end up with the high draws doing pretty well in the distance races as well, because what you don't want to do is commit too early and then head across to the rail. A, you're going fast enough in the first place, and B, if you're just behind that phalanx on the inside, you tend to struggle to get a run. And I quite like seeing a track where the field largely comes up the centre. There should be fewer hard luck stories then. Although York's one of those tracks that theoretically very, very fair indeed, wide, long straight. Those are all positives. But there seems to be a small number of horses, a small percentage of horses who just seem to absolutely loathe the place despite getting for them. And as you said, it always helps to have horses who've run well before there, because you can rule out that Yorkitis, if you like. You also have the issue of horses having to come across the track from the stables. So horses who are quite highly strung can be put off by that as well. So again, that's worth bearing in mind. But if horses have run well at the meeting before, or run well at one of the other big meetings at York, then that's a big positive going forward.
We're recording this on a Monday afternoon. Obviously, the weather forecast at the moment suggests that it could be a pretty dry week at York. It's currently good. The weather forecast looks, despite being quite cloudy, pretty settled for the next few days. That obviously, it's quite different to what we've had at Royal Ascot and Glorious Goodwood, where the ground has even changed throughout the week. So we're going into it, hopefully, with a steady forecast, which should be good.
Certainly makes life easier when you're doing podcasts like this. I mean, me and Rory have been sort of almost having to second guess what's going to happen. And Trushan, like I say, he was a huge point in case, wasn't he, at Royal Ascot, where we both were very keen on him. And looking at the rain maps, it was going to absolutely book it down Wednesday night to Thursday. And of course, that materialised the day after, and he was a withdrawal. And as we saw at Goodwood, what happened, he probably would have won the Gold Cup. But anyway, that's by the by. But yeah, with a clear forecast through the majority of the week, by the looks of it, at least we're, for the purposes of this one anyway, with the Wednesday and Thursday, it should be not decent ground.
Great. So then we move on to actually previewing the action itself. And before we do get into that, just let me point you in the direction of Odds, the oddschecker app. It's the best place to compare odds, extra places and offers between the major bookmakers. And you'll also get free daily tips from Andy and many more. So we're going to kick off this afternoon with the 225 on Wednesday. That's the Tattersalls Acomb Stakes, a Group 3 event, a £100,000 prize fund, and 5 runners go to post for the 7th furlong event. The Derby Legend heads the betting at the minute at 15-8 for Hugo Palmer. Noble Truth is 9-4 for Charlie Appleby and William Buick. You've then got Eraz at 5-2. Imperial Fighter is 6-1 for Andrew Balding. And finally, the outsider of the 5 at 20-1 is Royal Patronage with Mark Johnston. So an interesting race, chaps, in terms of Noble Truth and Eraz have already met so far this term. But Derby Legend is the favourite. And do you think he's a solid favourite, Rory?
Well, it's never that easy with 7 furlong group races for 2-year-olds at this stage of the season, because they're usually stepping up from maiden company or novice company, and there's a lot of supposition going on. So whether you could call a horse who's won a novice on his only start a solid favourite for a group race is up for debate. But I thought he was visually very impressive, Derby Legend. He hasn't posted an especially good time, and Andy will be the man to speak to about this. I don't have closing sectional figures, but I imagine his closing couple of furlongs at Doncaster would have been very impressive, because they didn't go very fast early on. There looked to be about 8 horses with a chance of furlong and a half out, and he's absolutely run them into the ground. And that's, in my view, that's very impressive. You see horses winning by wide margins on debut when they're given the run of the race, or when they go fast up front and stop. And this is one where, in theory, they're all quickening, but he was quickening much better than them. To win by 5 lengths in the end, I thought was a very impressive performance from Derby Legend. Strictly speaking, slightly less than both Eraz and Noble Truth, but of course they've had a couple of runs to do that. My gut feeling is that Derby Legend is the right favourite here. I wouldn't say the Acomb is a particular favourite punting race for me. We've seen plenty of really well fancied horses, well touted horses who've looked impressive first time up get buried in this race. And historically, it's never been a great race to try to buy money in. But from what I've seen, I think he's the right favourite. He looks an exciting prospect.
Andy, what are your thoughts on the race?
Yeah, I can put some flesh on the bones regards that performance at Doncaster. His time figure, as Rory said, wasn't anything special. It was adequate. It was a 79 on our ratings, which, if you're looking for an average, our good 2-year-olds often do 85 or over, and the real good ones, which has been probably about a dozen of them so far this season have run over a 90. Sandrine being the quickest, along with Lucille. They both recorded 93s on our time figure. So you can see the gulfing difference there between a genuine Group 1 2-year-old in a end-to-end gallop on the day itself, in that particular environment. But yeah, the back end sections was tremendous. 32.8 he did from 3 out, which was very healthy in comparison to Clive Cox's horse, Aratus, who clocked 34.2. So about a second and a half difference between that horse quickening from 3 and an older handicapper who we know is very useful. So obviously this horse is now going to go and prove itself in a hotter environment where the pace is likely to be strong. I'd imagine Royal Patronage will go off in front. He made the running last time out. Most of Mark Johnson horses in these kind of small field races with a bit of experience tend to do that anyway. So at least we're not going to get a dawdle here. But I must admit, I think the best form coming into this race is quite clearly between Eraz and Noble Truth. Certainly based on the numbers. Noble Truth beat Eraz, as you pointed out, Dan, at HQ earlier in the year. But Eraz was having his first run in his life. And Noble Truth had the benefit of having a run at the track previously. I think that experience, and in particular where they were drawn on the track as well, was a huge advantage towards Noble Truth. He was drawn more middle towards the far side where the race developed, and Eraz challenged right at the stand-side rail, which ended up being to his detriment. He then went to Ascot Eraz and bolted up in a very fast time, quickening well, getting over the ground really well, and his back-end sectionals are incredibly good. So I think I'd probably prefer him out of those two. Richard Hannon's 2-year-olds in general this season have been a very high standard. I think this one's easily the pick, along with Lucille. He could easily be up there with Lucille, I don't know, but he's very flashy, and I think York will suit him because, like I said, the way he gets over the ground, I think he'll be well suited to this surface. So he'd do for me, and I think I'd almost say he should be favourite, but anyway, that's just my personal view.
Okay, interesting. And just a word, Rory, on Imperial Fighter, the other first-time out winner for Andrew Balding, who could hopefully have been for a big week, I'm guessing, if he wants to win the Trainers' Championship this year.
Yeah, again, on the figures, he's got a little bit to find, but his speed figure for his debut was good. That was on heavy ground at Goodwood after the overnight rain. I think a lot of people will look at that and say, that's maybe one to be slightly wary of. But it's fairly rare for Andrew Balding to get a first-time out 2-year-old winner. If you back his 2-year-old second time up, you do very well. And he had 2 winners at Royal Ascot, second time up. Both of them very good prices as well. And Imperial Fighter might very well fit in the same category. He's in the Dewhurst, and Andrew Balding's got a lot of good 2-year-olds. He doesn't consider his geese to be swans. So the fact that Imperial Fighter has a Group 1 entry is significant. And you certainly shouldn't be judging him a heavy ground horse just because the ground happened to come up very soft on his debut. That was certainly softer than would have been expected when he was entered for that race. The going would have been good and drying out when he was declared. So I wouldn't judge him on the fact that was heavy, and he could be anything. And as I said, it's been 9 years. This tends to be a small field, a group race, but it's 9 years since an outright favourite won it. Now, I'm not a big fan of favourite stats, particularly in big field handicaps. In a 20-runner handicap where they're all tightly rated, you don't expect many outright favourites to be winning if the form is transparent. But in group races, you should be getting regular favourites winning these races. And the as I said when I started here, the Acomb's a tough race to analyse because all the horses who line up are open to improvement, and you're guessing how much improvement is going to come from them. Some of them who look like they're going to improve a stone won't improve at all. And some of them who look like they've reached a peak will suddenly improve by 10 pounds. That's the nature of 2-year-olds at this kind of trip and beyond. So I wouldn't be ruling Imperial Fighter out. As I said, I think Dubai Legend is the right favourite, but that's up for debate. But that doesn't necessarily mean he's a bet at short of 2-1.
So just to round up, Andy, it looks like Rory's going with the Derby Legend. What camp are you in the Acomb?
Yeah, I'll stick with Eraz. Like I said, I liked him when he won at Ascot, and hopefully he's improved enough to turn the form around with Noble Truth.
We then move on to the 3 o'clock, the Sky Bet Great Vulture Stakes, a Group 2 event over 12 furlongs, £150,000 prize fund, and 8 runners go to post for this event, including a number of horses who actually ran in this year's Derby. The market is headed, though, by Royal Ascot winner in Kamari for William Buick and Charlie Appleby at 9-4. You've then got High Definition at 7-2 for Aidan O'Brien. His stable companion Salukin is a 9-2 shot ahead of Third Realm, who's in at 5-1. With Your Beer and Youth Spirit both at 10-1. The Mediterranean is an 11-1 shot, and finally Scope is a 20-1 shot. So 8 horses go to post for this event. Kamari was impressive when defeating Wordsworth at Royal Ascot. But what do you make to his chances in this event, Rory?
He was impressive on his previous start when winning a maiden, which had worked out reasonably well at Yarmouth, as I said. And at Ascot, he seemed to win with a bit more in hand than the margin of a length and a half. My only issue is I think the Queen's Vase was a pretty moderate race this year. That would be the concern. Obviously, he's got the Grade 2 win on his card, or Group 2 rather, I should say. I'm not sure it was up to Group 2 standard this year, and he's got to give £3 to his rivals in this race. And I think he might struggle dropping back in trip. Of course, the Voltigeur is a St. Ledger trial, and always has been sort of the main St. Ledger trial, but it's not, it's actually short of a mile and a half. So if you're dropping back from a mile and 6, that's a little bit of a concern. So while I liked how Kamari did it, and while I respect the fact that Charlie Appleby's got a tremendous team of 3-year-olds this season, I just wonder whether the concession of £3 might just be beyond him in this race. So I'm not massively keen to be backing him at the prices. The O'Brien runners are very interesting, despite the fact that he's had a pretty moderate season outside the Classics in the UK. I think he'd be happy enough, given how the Classics have gone, to be perfectly honest. But some disappointments at Goodwood and Royal Ascot was similarly, it wasn't making the headlines that he has in the past. But High Definition and Sir Lucan are both interesting here. Sir Lucan arguably should have won the Gordon Stakes. He was coming off a break there. He hadn't run since Navan in May. The St. Ledger appears to be his main aim, and he was given an exaggerated waiting ride by Frankie Dettori. He looks to be travelling very well at the head of the straight, but there was a good gap for him to come through with about 2.5 furlongs to run, and Frankie waited, no doubt under instruction, to come as late as possible. But I think the winner really got first run on him there, and he was closing fast at the line, and gave the impression that if he'd been asked for his effort a little bit sooner, he might have won that. And there's also the possibility that he wasn't 100% fit on the day after a break as well. So he should come on for the run. Cheek pieces on first time, you can read in a couple of ways, but Aidan's won derbies with horses wearing cheek pieces in the past, so it's not a massive concern. I'd be more concerned if the ground got very quick for Sir Lucan, given most of his form is with a little bit of ease. But I think he looks to be one horse in the race he's got scope to do better this autumn, and he seems to have been laid out for an autumn campaign. So I would just about make him the pick here. But again, it's not a race that I could approach with a huge amount of confidence.
Okay, interesting thoughts. Andy, just before I get your selection, what do you make, obviously, of the forgotten horse in many ways, High Definition? Obviously very impressive in 2 starts last year. He was anti-post favourite for the Derby. He didn't end up making that race. He disappointed then in the Irish Derby. What do you kind of think about him returning to York?
I think we're at the crossroads really with High Definition, aren't we? You'd give him a pass on his first run in the Dante when it was a bit of a rush preparation. I think they were trying to juggle the pack with regards to their Derby horses, and he was obviously high on the short list. He missed the Derby when Bolshoi Bally went there. Obviously, that ended up being the incorrect decision by Ballydoyle in the end, and they decided to wait for the Curragh. Now, to all intents and purposes, the Curragh was his race, the Irish Derby. It was on home soil. It was a track where he was 2 for 2, and there was no real excuse as far as I can see. So he's a difficult one to weigh up. He's had another 53-day break coming into York. At least he's got York form. Mm-hmm. Quite a few of these haven't, having already been on the nose mile once. That's a positive. I think a lot will stem from which horse Ryan Moore ends up choosing. If he stays loyal to High Definition, that would be interesting, because the other 2 or 3 horses the other 2 horses that Aidan O'Brien's got here have got strong claims in their own right. So, in short, I don't really know what to do with him really, and I think a lot of punters won't know that either. Talking of Aidan O'Brien, I agree with Roy. I think Sir Lucan is the bet here. At time of recording, he's in and around the 4-1 mark. Let's say you can get bigger and he's shorter, with other firms. But I think if all 8 runners go to post and you can get 4-1, I think he represents a fairly solid each way bet. It's hard to see him not being in the 3 based on his run at Goodwood, when I agree with Rory, he probably should have won. Interestingly, the cheek pieces have gone on, so that perhaps connections feel as though that he needs a little bit of assistance making his mind up. But he travels really well in his races, which I think is significant. He gives himself every chance. Travels well, but doesn't over race. And he's also going to be held about the back, I think, which is another key factor. He's likely to be having nothing to do with the early speed, which is what you want here at York. Whereas at Goodwood, they tend to get away from you, but here they're coming back to you. And I think most of his work has been, or his stronger work has been done in the latter part of the race, particularly when he beat Wordsworth the time before at Navan. He was very strong in that latter stage that day, going up the hill. So regardless of who Ryan Moore rides, I would be with him at 9-2. And I do think Scope is a one worth mentioning as well at a big price. He's 25 to 1. Don't forget, he finished third in the Linfield Derby trial, only just behind Adyar. He's probably more ground reliant maybe than one or two. Laurie mentioned Salukin perhaps wanting a bit of ease, but I think Salukin's run fine on good ground on his last two runs. But I don't think it is going to rain. But if it was, there's 1 or 2 showers forecast for Thursday, then Tuesday, then he's definitely a player on several bits of form this season at a bigger price. Your bear pulled too hard at Goodwood. Not sure that the gelding operation and the hood has quite worked with him. And I think Third Realm, maybe he does want a bit of ease in the ground as well. So, yeah, I'm in agreement with Rory. We're both settled on Salukin. Whereas I'd probably go each way.
The last thing to say on that is we do have the jockey bookings now. And Frank Editori's on Salukin again, which doesn't put me off in the slightest.
No.
It affects the betting slightly, but I'm more than happy to be back in Frankie on one of Aidan's.
And looking ahead, chaps, obviously you talk about Salukin as a St. Ledger type. How this race, obviously in the past, what's been the record kind of a great Voltigeur winner, or even a horse that's been placed in the race going on to Ledger? Can it act as quite a key classic clue?
I think Logician won it 2019. He obviously went on to win, but generally speaking, it's been a bit of a you haven't really got much of a solid guide. Certainly from the winners, Pile Driver won it last year, Old Persian the year before, Cracksman, Idaho. So mixed messages really from the Voltigeur.
Historically, it's been good, but it's less of a guide in recent years than it was, say, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, that's pretty sums it up pretty well.
So Andy's already mentioned that Salukin around 4 to 1, but he's as big as 9 to 2 with Betfair. So obviously make sure that you do shop around on the oddschecker app for all the best prices. But both the guys are going with Salukin for Aidan O'Brien and Frank Editori in the Great Voltigeur at 3 o'clock. We'll then move on to the big race of the day. Well, of the meeting, arguably the £1 million Juddmonte International Stakes, over 10 furlongs, runs at 3:35 p.m. live on ITV Racing. We've got a field of 7 going to post. Obviously, we'll reflect on the news this morning, which has clearly shaken up the market. But at the moment, Aidan O'Brien now relies on Love, who is the 7 to 4 favourite. You've got Mishriff then in at 2 to 1 for John and Thady Gosden. Alcohol Free, the Sussex Stakes heroine, is 5 to 1. Jim Crowley and William Haggis team up with Mo Harthurth, who's 7 to 1. You've then got Alenka at 14 to 1. Max Sweeney at 16 to 1. And finally, Juan Elcano at 33 to 1. But clearly, chaps, the big news to start on is obviously that St. Mark's Basilica, an impressive winner of the Coral Eclipse, he has not been declared for the race after developing an infection from an incident on the gallops on Monday morning. And luckily, Ballydor did decide to leave In Love as the super sub. But how much has that changed kind of your opinion of the race and what selection you'd be going for now? Start with you, Rory.
Yeah, well, it would have changed my selection on the race. I thought St. Mark's Basilica would have been pretty hard to beat here. And obviously Love's come in, and she would have gone for the Yorkshire Oaks instead. Has been drafted in here. I'd be pretty keen on Mishriff, I have to say. I mean, you could argue his reputation's been a little bit tarnished, but I think it appears now that he just needed the run at Sandown in the Eclipse. That's the way he's shaped in it. It was slightly disappointing to find from the yard that he wasn't wound up for a Group 1 coming back from his travels. But I think John Gosden very much aware that difficult to get a horse to peak, not just for Dubai, but also in Saudi Arabia as well, which he's done for the last couple of seasons. And he wasn't at his best at the tail end of last season, possibly as a result of that. And I think John Gosden has been at pains to make sure that he had a good enough break so that he'd be firing come late summer, early autumn. And as a result, he was just a bit undercooked at Sandown. He ran an awful lot better in the King George. I've got no problem saying that's a very, very good performance. I think Adayar has just surprised people, but he really is a worthy Derby winner, worthy King George winner now. And Mishriff has the clear beating of Love on that running. Not that easy to find excuses for Love because the ground, most people said beforehand, the ground coming very fast for the King George was in her favour. She didn't seem to enjoy it on the day, but she'd come off a win on firm ground in the Prince of Wales Stakes before that. I'm just not convinced by her this season. She missed a few early season targets. She was reasonably impressive in the Prince of Wales Stakes, but again, I thought that was a weak Group 1 in the end. I think she was, while it was a good performance to win that after the break that she had, I'm not sure it was a great performance in the wider scheme of things. And I think she's probably better judged now on what she achieved in the King George, which gives her a little bit to find. And it's worth pointing out that just because you're an absolutely top-notch 3-year-old, it doesn't automatically follow that you're going to be in the same position as a 4-year-old. You've got to progress again because you're not getting the alliances in races like this. So maybe we overrated Love a little bit last season based on her beating 3-year-old fillies. I wouldn't want her to be ruling her out, but I think she's been a little overrated for me this season. And Mishriff has maybe just gone under the radar a little bit because of a couple of defeats. But I thought he was back to his best in the King George last time out. I think he's better at 1.25 miles than 1.5 miles as well.
I was just about to
and I
say,
think,
I interviewed.
Yeah, with a couple of runs behind him.
No, I was just going to say, I interviewed David Egan 2 weeks ago about that, and he said, the drop back to 10 furlongs is probably the thing that we're most looking forward to more than anything. 12 furlongs just stretches him, whereas 10 furlongs is obviously his ideal trip.
Or 10.5. You can argue 10.5 is his ideal trip.
Yeah.
Essentially, what he gets was the same distance as the Prix de Jockey Club. So yeah, I think he's got everything in his favour. The ground will be fine for him. He's effective on soft. He's effective on firm, and anything in between. And with a couple of runs behind him, he should be at his very peak now. So I've got no issues with Mishriff. Love, I wouldn't be adamant, but I haven't been completely convinced this season that she's as good as she was last. Alcohol free, I think it's tremendously sporting to run her here, but you won't find too many no-nay nevers winning Group 1 races at 1.25 miles, and I think it's a big ask for her stepping up and trip. She stays a mile better than I thought she would. I thought at the start of the season that she would struggle to see the trip out in the Guineas, and I kind of thought on the day that she didn't quite see it out, but she's clearly done so since. And she deserves all the plaudits for the campaign she's had, and Jeff Smith and Andrew Balding again deserve a lot of praise for taking the chance of running her in this race rather than finding an easier target. But I can't really see her staying. I don't think it'll be soft enough for McSweeney. Mohafeth probably should have won over course and distance last time out, but that was a lesser race than this, and I think he'll come unstuck in a proper Group 1 race. If he was good enough to win the International, then I think William Haggas would have been throwing him in the Derby. A lot of people were disappointed that he didn't run there and thought that was a little bit of a gutless decision. But I think William Haggas knew that he wouldn't have featured in the Derby. And to me, he arrived there to win his race. I know Jim Riley gave him a lot to do here last time out, but he arrived there to win the race, and he either didn't go through with it or he didn't stay the trip. The extra half furlong just found him out. And I think in a better race, and a race that's going to be run at a strong pace as well, I don't think he will see things out either. So the other one to bear in mind, I suppose, is Alenka, who was a little disappointing behind Hurricane Lane in the Grand Prix de Paris, but his form up to that has worked out pretty well. And as we've seen so far, you don't want to be underestimating the 3-year-old. So I think Alenka might be the biggest danger to Mishriff, but I'm very happy to go with Mishriff here, and he'd be my most confident shout on the day.
So Mishriff, a very confident selection for Rory. What about yourself, Andy?
Yeah, I very rarely tip in races like this. I think probably the King George is the only Group 1 older horse race, all age race I've had a right crack at this season. Usually because you get small fields, the shape of them is difficult, the paces are hard to work out, and you've just got a really good bunch of horses to try and fathom out what's going to go on. I couldn't disagree with Rory's pick with Mishriff. I think a strongly run 1.25 miles or extending 1.25 miles should be absolutely ideal for him. Whereas arguably, I think Love probably wants a little bit further. I think she maybe wants 1.5 miles, and maybe against her own sex, she has been slightly underwhelming this season. I'd have to agree with alcohol free as well. I mean, she's the one that's caught me out and made me look the biggest fool this season, which is not difficult to do. But I thought early on in the season when they ran him in the Greenham, she was going to be a sprinter rather than a miler. I couldn't believe they ran him in the Guinea. She ran okay, but it still left me thinking that she wouldn't get beyond a mile, certainly a mile. And then she went and won the Coronation on heavy ground at Ascot, much to my amazement. But yeah, No Nay Nevers. You look at the medium average distance that most No Nay Nevers win at. It's probably somewhere in between 6 furlongs and a mile. There's not that many that won over beyond the mile. So a mile, and don't forget this is a galloping mile, extended mile and a quarter, likely to be run at a fair pace. I'd imagine that Love will make the run in. She looks the only one who possibly could take them along. So yeah, I can't see her staying. I wouldn't be as probably detrimental to the chances of Mishriff that Rory would be. It was a very slowly run race that horse was involved in last time out, and he was asked to close in off a slow pace when they were quickening. So he's got there, but that massive effort that he had from being probably 7 or 8 lengths behind, turning for home to get there, he couldn't quite go again because I think he was on fumes. But I think that was just due to the way that the race was run. I think a more evenly run gallop and perhaps a little bit further up the field. I think they're riding him a bit closer to the pace this time. We'll see him in a better light. But I think he's got a ton of class, Mishriff. And the fact that he's had a run at York and they've probably come away from that race with a bit more knowledge of how to ride him, I don't think he's going to be as far away from this as probably what you'd think. So I do think William Haggas has got a fairly strong hand with him and Alan Kerr as well. So I might just box those two up because Alan Kerr, don't forget, beat the Derby winner over a mile and a quarter earlier in the season on good ground. And he stays really well, which I think is important. So it's a race. If I was going to have a betting, I'd probably have a bit of fun at the prices and back the 2 Haggas horses. Mishriff in and around the 6-1 mark. And what we're looking at with Alan Kerr, 14s, did you say top price?
14s at the minute, yeah.
Yeah, they're big prices for horses that, there's been genuine excuses for the last runs. So yeah, those two would do for me at the odds.
What do you make of Juan Elcano, who was in front of Mishriff in that race at York last time out?
Yeah, I think he was slightly flattered because he was on the speed. As I said, it was a slow run race. We only got an 80 time figure. I mean, most of the Group 1s we get when they've got a pace is close to 100. So you wouldn't take that form literally. He was a good 7 or 8 lengths ahead of Mishriff with 4 to run, and yeah, half a furlong from home, they're level. So Mishriff has chipped away 7 or 8 lengths into a genuinely good horse like Juan Elcano, and he's easily the better of him. So I think the odds have probably got it about right, with him being a genuine outsider in this field.
So just to round up, Mishriff for you, Rory, but something at a price that is that Alenka the one that you think could outrun his odds at 14-1?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah.
And Andy, you're also, where are you going with yours, Andy? Who do you like?
Yeah, I'm like I say, I'm only going to round a jinx on the race. It's a race I probably won't put on my column because I'm bound to find something more concrete than what I've got. But for the purposes of this piece that we're doing now, the 2 Haggas horses are fine for me.
Okay, great. And then before we go on to the last 3 races of the day, we'll just go back to the 150, which is the opening race of the whole meeting, the Sky Bet and Symphony Group Handicap. £70,000 prize fund, just over 5 furlongs. And you've got some pretty evergreen sprinters in this, including the likes of El Astronaute and now an 8-year-old. But the market at the moment is headed at 7-1 by Hurricane Ivor for Tom Marquand and William Haggas. He's the joint favourite, along with Twilight Calls for David Probert and Henry Candy. Then at 8-1, you've got Pendleton. And then it's around 11-1 Barb with the likes of Mon Damage, and at 12-1 Soul Seeker. Just a quick word on this event, lads. Anything that springs to mind that is a bit of interest for you in this? Andy, start with you.
Yeah, one of the best races on the figures, anyway, certainly from a handicap perspective at Goodwood, was the sprint won by Where the Dealing's Done. And we got an extraordinary time figure for that race, and it probably gave me a little bit more of an insight and a clue why Twilight Calls didn't justify my confidence. First and foremost, I don't think Twilight Calls probably handled Goodwood as well as I thought, but more predominantly the ground, it was still on the easy side. He definitely wants fast ground, genuine quick ground, Twilight Calls. Don't think he was quite at his best that day, and that's to take nothing away from the winner who won on merit when the dealing's done. I think 14-1 for Roger Teal's sprinter is a fair price given that he's an improving sprinter that could easily make up into a group animal further down the line. He's certainly got plenty of size and scope to do that. The third horse, Digital, has already advertised the form of that race by winning next time out. So I'm pretty comfortable in saying that based on the numbers, these two have probably got leading claims. The only thing that would put you off would be that they've yet to run at York, either of those two horses. And there's lots of horses who've got solid York form in these kind of events. They know the ins and outs of the complexities of races like this. You know, the likes of Major Jumbo, the likes of Rory Delargy, the Copper Knights of this world. Those hard-knocking older horse handicappers that have had their nose blooded in these kind of races before on the nose mile, whereas these two I'm dealing with, 3-year-olds, they haven't kind of been in that environment yet, albeit they did run in a fast run race last time out. But anyway, like I say, those are the two that I'm quite keen on because of that time figure at Goodwood, when the dealing's done, and Twilight Calls.
So when the dealing's done, 12-1, Andy said, available at 14-1 on Betfair. So of course, do make sure you shop around, and Twilight Calls, the 7-1 joint favourite at the moment. What about yourself, Rory, in the opener?
I'm not enormously confident, but I did put up Ostilio at a big price for the Stewards Cup, and he had absolutely no chance in that race the way it panned out. He was quite well backed. He was backed into 16-1 at one stage before drifting out on the day. He would have handled the ground okay, but he was on the wrong side of the track completely. And the market has rather ignored the fact that he was punted as if as if he was well fancied then, and whether that was just because there was people betting into a weak market in the Stewards Cup the day before and just after Dex, I don't know. But he's dropped in the weights again, Ostilio, and I think at 50s you can afford to throw a bob or two at him. My argument for him at Goodwood was that his trainer is very good at reinventing horses as sprinters. It takes a little bit of time to do that. Now, he was a horse who won the Britannia at Royal Ascot as a 3-year-old over a mile. And he's not an obvious sprinter on paper, but Paul Midgley has gradually been, getting there with him, despite the fact that it looks like his form looks terrible this season. But he was beginning to get his act together before that run at Goodwood. And as we've seen, he was 17th to 24. The horse that finished 22nd has gone and won the Great St. Wilfrid easily last weekend. So it shows that different conditions can make a big difference there. And while 5.5 furlongs, I suspect is a little short for him, I don't think he's a 50-1 shot. I think he's more like a 16-20-1 shot on this. He's a bit of an all or nothing bet. He's not one I'd be backing each way, but at 50s, I could throw a few bob on him.
Okay, an interesting thought from Rory Ostilio at 50-1. And remember, Sky Bet, the sponsors of this race, are playing 7 places instead of 4, so it's well worth checking that out. Just on the last 3 races of the day, chaps, you got the Sky Bet Handicap at 4:10. We then got it at 4:45. The Irish Stakes, the Fillies Handicap, and then at 5:20, the Sky Bet Nursery Handicap. Is there anything at all that springs to mind for those 3 races, Andy? Start with you first.
Quite like Scaramanga in the 4:10. I think Paul Nicholls doesn't run that many horses on the flat nowadays, but he's never normally a million miles away with the ones that he keeps ticking over. And he beat Rodrigo Diaz last time out at Newbury. And anyone who saw Rodrigo Diaz run over the weekend when he chased down the very classy Hookham will know that form line is pretty good. I think the Aussie Bloodstock guys have done a shrewd bit of business there with that horse. He could be Melbourne Cup bound either this year or next year. Arcadian Sunrise, a horse I've mentioned on this podcast quite a few times, but I can't seem to catch him when he runs. I tipped him at Ascot, he didn't run. I tipped him for the Galway Hurdle, he didn't make the gig. He missed the ballot, and then he won, I think, 2 days later back at Ballybrit over hurdle. So he's a very small horse, Arcadian Sunrise. So just a couple to mention there. And again, course form in the last race in the nursery. Bosch ran in a very, very competitive. Well, it was actually a conditions race. It was one of those sales races called the Ballyhane Stakes last time out at Naas. But in all intents and purposes, that was like a Group 3, Group 2 event. The winner, the filly of Ger Lyons, is Sacred Bridge, is one of the fastest 2-year-olds I've got so far this season over in Ireland. And he chased her home up the stand side. But he'd won over the course and distance early on the season when he just got the bobbing finish over Giza Sub. But, Hannon in a handicap here with course and distance form, that's got to be a plus. And Jadlan as well, he's another one that has already proven that he's a course winner when winning over 5 furlongs, and he ran in a good race at Goodwood last time out. So the 2 horses there, Bosch and Jadlan, I think would probably get my scrutiny in the final race.
Yeah, Bosch looks very, very solid in the finale. What about yourself, Rory, across those 3 races?
No prices for the last 2, and I'm not massively inclined to get involved at this stage. When we do get prices, I might change my mind. But I'm very keen on Bodyline in the 2-mile handicap. He's a horse I liked last season. He was a good second on quick ground at Yarmouth early on, and he didn't have the greatest of luck. He was a little disappointing at this meeting last year in the Melrose after a slow start. But interestingly, he's made the running on his last 2. He won at Yarmouth at the back end of last season, and then he was second on his return at Musselburgh, where Luke Morris didn't go fast enough on him. He set the pace, but he rather set it up for a horse with a slightly better turn of foot in Wise Eagle in that contest. But he kept on really well. He battled back when he was headed, and he'd be seen to much better effect. Just maybe given a lead in a really strongly run race. He's a horse who doesn't have a turn of foot, really, but he gallops on very strongly. And I don't think we saw the best of him last season. He's a big, scopy horse who managed to win it too, unusually for one of Mark Prescott's. But I think he'll do better this season than he did last. He remains on a decent mark. He's gone up 3 pounds for getting beaten at Musselburgh, but that's fair enough. The winners turned into a bit of a win machine this season. And Bodyline, I think, will come on. Well, I don't think he will come on much further on. I argued at the time that he'd be pretty fit for that because he was due to run at Goodwood and came out because of the ground. He needs fast ground, so I'm hoping it gets even quicker than the current Good. If it ends up on the slow side, I'd leave him alone. But I think this might be heading towards Good to Firm on the day, which will suit him really well, and he'll be well suited by a step up to 2 miles with a strongish pace. So he'd be my idea of one of the better bets in the handicaps there.
Okay, interesting thoughts from Rory. So in the 4:10, he's with Bodyline, whereas Andy likes the look of Arcadian, Sunrise, and also Scaramanga. And in the 5:20, Andy likes the look of both Bosch and Jadlan. So just to wrap up, Andy, your best bet on day 1 of the 2021 Welcome to Yorkshire Ebor Festival?
I would say the price is Lord Lucan each way. I think that's my idea of a good solid bet. Hard to see him not running well. I like the way he's progressing, and Kamari's form's not overly strong. That race at Royal Ascot, which Rory alluded to, I don't think there's been a winner out of it so far. So there's a good argument to be made that Sir Lucan could be or should be close to favourite here, and he looks overpriced.
Sir Lucan for Andy in the Great Voltigeur Stakes around the 4-1, 9-2 mark at 3 o'clock. And finally, Rory, yourself?
I certainly wouldn't disagree with that. I'd be with Lord Lucan as well, but or Sir Lucan rather. Lord Lucan's still missing. But I'll go Mishriff. He's I think he's a standout in the I'm against the next 2 in the market essentially there. But at a bigger price, no one's I've got to put up. Mishriff will be the bet of the day, and I'll just leave it at that.
2-1 Mishriff in the feature race, the £1 million Juddmonte International. Thanks very much for listening to day 1 of the Welcome to Yorkshire Ebor oddschecker betting podcast. We'll be back to look ahead to day 2, which of course features Snowfall in the Yorkshire Oaks very, very shortly.